Wait, yes. And he is on evaluation of feedback, his second and third speech. So he has been in Toastmasters for 5 years, and he is doing this speech utilizing the information he got feedback for his last evaluation. And he is practicing a Frankenstein version of last week's speech using the feedback he got. It was a 5 to 7 minute speech. So please give a big applause.
When I was 6 years old, I was a free-range kid. That means my mother and father both worked, and I did whatever I pleased, at home or out at the park or all across the range. Right next to our apartment, there was the swimming pool. It was gated, but it was always unlocked. I had swam before, sort of, always walking in the shallow end. I had grown to learn the deep end is scary. You could die. You could drown in the deep end. Don't go there. I can remember from time to time, there's that kind of draw with the deep end. Do you remember that? You just felt that you had to push it as far as you can. And I would walk as far as I could into the deep end until I was on my tippy toes. But then I'd get to that point where I felt, oh my gosh, I can't get back. Ah! Then I learned that if I did something like this, I could come back. That was the first phase for me in learning how to swim. But one day when I was 6 and I ventured into the pool area, there was nobody else around, no lifeguards, nothing. A little bit scary, right? I was swimming in the shallow end. That deep end was attracting me. It wasn't a huge pool. So from one side to the other side of the shallow end, the deep end would be over there, I dove off, and the momentum propelled me to the other side of the wall in the shallow end. That momentum, I learned something from that. If I had momentum, I could get from one side to the other. That was the second thing I learned about swimming. I didn't kick or paddle, I just dove and went straight across. And then the thought came to me, wow, what if I jumped in at the deep end and propelled myself to the shallow end? Would I make it? As scary as a thought that might be to you, I did that. And then combined with understanding that if you pushed the water and kicked your feet a little bit, you'd make that momentum continue. That's how I learned to swim. I felt confident. I felt liberated from my fear. I could swim in the deep end. What is it about fear? What's the problem with it? In my experience, there's 2 kinds of fear. There's a constructive fear, meaning our intelligence tells us that there's something that we lack, a skill perhaps, experience. But with persistence, we can learn it, we can master it, we can overcome the challenge. On the other hand, there's a destructive fear. These are the fears that are the ghosts of our doubts. They feed off of our negative thoughts and emotions and hold us captive if we let them. They'll feed off the slightest potential for failure and rejection and magnify them into monsters that stop us in our tracks. Let's take public speaking as an example. Constructive fears in public speaking would be something like, when we started, I don't know how to write a speech. I don't know how to deliver a speech. I might forget my speech when I'm up there. Those are valid, legitimate concerns, all of which can be overcome, right? Then there's the destructive fears. They're going to hate me. That guy's frowning at me. I'm going to drown in my failure in front of all these people. Destructive fears. So how do we deal with these things? I've got 3 R's for you. Reason, resolve. Reason, rehearse, and resolve. Reason. We have the capacity to think and separate the destructive fears from the constructive fears. The destructive fears, if we'll expose them for their harmful nature to us, and the fact that they are mostly untrue, we can liberate ourselves and focus on the constructive fears, those skills and those things that we need to do to accomplish our goal and speak. Learn to write a speech. Learn to deliver a speech. Don't worry about whatever goes wrong. Learn from it. Rehearse. We have the capacity to mentally create a path and practice a speech. Mentally practice it. I mentioned that one of my biggest challenges is the worry of forgetting a speech, what I'm going to say. Darren LaCroix, a former champion internationally in Toastmasters, teaches this, to block the speech. Remember the places on the floor you're going to go, and that'll help you remember the story. For example, I once delivered a speech called Ribbit. It was a tall tale. I was having a conversation with Kermit the Frog. I would go here. Hi, I'm Kermit the Frog. That was the first story. Then the second part of the story, he meets Miss Piggy. Oh, Kermit! Then there was the third part. He gives me counsel on how to speak as a preeminent Toastmaster that he is. You looked at me funny. You know he's a Toastmaster, right? He hosted and therefore was the Toastmaster in 118 episodes of The Muppet Show. That makes him the preeminent Toastmaster. So rehearse. And then the final R, resolve. Resolving to crush our goals gives us mental power. Resolve shouts louder than those ghosts of our doubts if we're committed. My challenge to you, fellow Toastmasters, is to reason through, separate the destructive from the constructive. Get rid of the destructive, work on the constructive. Do the things that you can do to get better. Secondly, rehearse. And then thirdly, resolve to get good at whatever challenge you're taking on. And if you'll do that, you'll be swimming in the deep end of the speaking pool. Adam Toastmaster.
Very, very, very good.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to shake that hand of that speaker.